It's Wednesday, April 26th, 2023, and I'm here on Highway 171. That's Illinois State Highway 171 in Joliet, Illinois, or Joliet. And I'm on the way to the Old Joliet Prison. Starting to look like the place.
Turn right.
Iconic place there. Not exactly a very busy place at the moment. Seems like I'll have it almost all to myself. This is much like the last prison I visited. Was it Mansfield in Ohio, better known as the Shawshank Prison, and even the Eastern State one in Philadelphia. That was the one I visited before that. It's preserved in sort of a state of disrepair, not fixed up, so it isn't the way it would have been in its prime. At the time and day I am here, the only thing available is a self-guided tour. They do have guided tours on certain days and mostly on weekends, but certain select other days as well. The Old Joliet Prison. The Illinois State Penitentiary at Joliet, 1858 to 2002, is synonymous with the city of Joliet, incorporated only 6 years prior to the prison in 1852. Through the years, it has been known as the Joliet Correctional Center, Collins Street Prison, Joliet State Penitentiary, and is now known simply as the Old Joliet Prison. The long-standing presence of the prison has solidified Joliet's reputation as America's prison city. The Old Joliet Prison was born out of a desire to reform, or for reform. Despite its long history as an institution of incarceration, Joliet was not the first state penitentiary in Illinois. For nearly 15 years following Illinois' statehood, criminal justice was dispensed at a local level until the state penitentiary was erected at the southern city of Alton in 1833 atop a bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. The Alton Penitentiary was a privately run prison with virtually no state oversight, its operations leased out to a private individual. In her quest to reform so-called charitable institutions such as prisons and asylums throughout America, Dorothea Dix inspected the Alton prison in 1847 and was appalled at the conditions there. Despite many physical abuses, she was particularly outraged that the prisoners were not even afforded the dignity to be seated while eating their meals. Following Dix's report to the state legislature, plans began for the state to construct a new penitentiary in Joliet. During this period, prison oversight improved somewhat by the establishment of a semi-autonomous group of 3 commissioners appointed by the governor, who reported to the Illinois General Assembly. Construction of the Old Joliet Prison began with what is now the North Seg building, also called the Tombs by the corrections officers, completed in the fall of 1857. In May 22, 1958, 50 men and 3 women departed Alton for Joliet by train and arrived to begin the work of constructing the prison around themselves using stone quarry just yards away. The administration building and cell houses, described as resembling a castle on the Rhine, were completed in 1865. The design of the prison was intentionally foreboding. It was a powerful structure designed to frighten and intimidate those inside and outside the walls, representing a physical manifestation of the power of the state. The distinctive castellated Gothic architecture was the work of W. Boyington and Otis Wheelock. Boyington's obituary described him as Chicago's first architect, and his offices were lost not once but twice to fire in 1871 and 1873. Boyington was also a prolific user of Joliet limestone, which was also used in his most famous building, the iconic Chicago Water Tower. The Old Joliet Prison is closely identified with and sometimes mistaken for its sister facility, the much larger and still active Stateville Penitentiary, famous for its distinctive panopticon cell houses. Stateville is located approximately 5 miles northwest on Old Route 66, the site of the former prison farm in what is now the village of Crest Hill. It was opened in 1925 and was supposed to have closed the Old Joliet Prison permanently, but despite many attempts and announcements, the old prison remained open and populated by maximum security inmates until early 2002. The building located to the east of Collins Street, that's across the street from where we are now, was the first women's penitentiary in the state of Illinois, opened in 1896. Prior to this, women inmates were housed in the upper floors of the administration building. The prison property also contains nearly 130 acres of green space, formerly occupied by the quarries. The conveyor building, which transported and crushed the stone removed from the quarry, remains standing. Joliet is also home to an additional correction facility, which serves juvenile offenders located in the southern portion of the city. So I just got validated for my reservation, and we don't actually enter the building here. They have it arranged. So I walk back out along the street here and go in through the famous front gate, which is of course the one that is seen with Joliet Jake Blues coming out in the beginning of the Blues Brothers. And this of course is the prison featured in the early scenes of the Blues Brothers. So this smaller prison building across the street is the one that was built later on for women inmates, and it's now used as the Old Joliet Haunted Prison for events such as that. Yeah, famous location indeed. The person at the front desk said that this gate, which again is pictured with strong backlighting when Jake Blues comes out to greet his brother Elwood on this street, and at that place the car would have been parked just about over there, says that the film company had to pay the prison quite a bit of money to fix the area up enough that it would look right for the picture, and then the prison only allowed them one shot of the scene. They were expecting to take a whole bunch of them, and at least if this gal told me correctly, they had to just do the one shot and that was it. They have a lot of cautions about this place. It's not fixed up really, so there's a lot of uneven surfaces, gratings, crumbly areas, places where sharp points of metal might stick out, vermin, rats, all sorts of things that could potentially cause issues for visitors. So you have to kind of agree to quite a lot of fine print about what might happen to you wandering around here. Looks like this place has had a fire. For as long as it has held prisoners, the Old Joliet Prison was often the front lines of debates and disputes involving the use of convict labor. Convict labor built the prison, and its first warden, Samuel K. Casey, also served as its general contractor under the supervision of the prison's Board of Commissioners. The practice of leasing inmate labor to the open market was a publicly accepted and perfectly legal practice for decades. In early 1884, the Chicago Tribune reported that 1,103 out of the Old Joliet Prison's 1,404 convicts, nearly 80%, were working for contractors, noting the average price paid for convict labor at present is not much over 50 cents per man per day. Gradual reform came to state laws governing prison labor, and by 1903 laws were changed mandating that inmates could only produce products for use by state institutions. This law was amended shortly thereafter in 1905 to reflect a compromise that allowed up to 40% of inmate-produced goods to be sold on the open market. This resulted in a questionable interpretation of the law by Joliet Warden E.J. Murphy, who put 40% of the prison's entire workforce in the production of goods that were sold on the private market. In 1907, a coalition of merchants publicly objected to this practice in the Chicago Tribune, terming the state a legal burglar and demanding return of the 1903 statute in the face of Murphy's misconstruing of the 1905 law. The Tribune conceded, "It has been said that some of Murphy's relatives and friends are more closely affiliated with the traffic in prison-made goods than is sanctioned by political etiquette. Convict labor at the Old Joliet Prison even permeated the presidential election of 1892, with a contractor publicly attacking candidate Grover Cleveland for his administration's role in awarding a construction bid for a federal post office building in Peoria to a contractor later revealed to have used Joliet inmates to dress the stone." The progressive administration of Warden Edmund Allen and the introduction of the honor system allowed inmates to earn wages in prison industries by 1914. In addition to making furniture, mattresses, and other mass-produced products, prisoners could make articles in their leisure hours. These products were then sold in the prison store and proceeds given to the inmates. Allen even allowed honor men to work outside of the prison for the state of Illinois, establishing Camp Hope, an encampment of 51 inmates near Dixon, Illinois, who built and improved roads. For years, prison and state officials argued the use of inmate labor would save taxpayer funds, while entities like labor unions and private contractors maintained that state work should be given to free labor. Debates about the role of labor have since evolved into concerns with the legal and human rights of incarcerated persons to the present day. So these buildings here to the right of coming in the east gate that we just went through were the ones dedicated to prison industries. The roof collapsed in this building not all that long ago as a result of arson fire. Some people had broken in and set the place ablaze. The walls are standing, but the roof is gone. There's the north yard and the wall beyond. Here's another prison industries building. Which also has its roof missing. I'm not sure if it was from the same fire as the other building or at a different time. I like the sign, Historic Preservation Award, and the roof is gone. I'm sure it's not the fault of the preservationists. You've got the collapsed roof there and all the ashes and so on. And this area is known to the prisoner, or the prison cognoscenti at this point, as the Burnt District. There's information to the effect that following the prison's closure in February of 2002, between 2013 and 2017, 4 buildings were burnt in acts of arson, including the automotive shop, mattress factory, records warehouse, and the bathhouse. And this is also part of the burnt district across the road here. The Old Joliet Prison finally closed on February 16th of 2002. Largely the site remained in good condition until the early morning hours of July 25th, 2013, when a fire erupted around 3 a.m. Later ruled to be arson, the fire destroyed the automotive shop adjacent to the East Sallyport. As flames leapt over the wall adjacent to Collins Street, the Joliet Fire Department was unable to gain access to the inside of the prison walls and had to extinguish the fire from over the top of the wall. Vandalism and damage continued unchecked for several years after, largely due to coordinated efforts on social media, which branded the Old Joliet Prison site as a destination for urban explorers around the region, and a lack of security presence on the property. It is suspected that the majority of these urbex trespassers wished to explore and photograph the site, but the unsecured site would face unchecked physical vandalism and suffer 3 additional acts of arson. Following the last act of arson, a vocally frustrated Joliet Mayor Bob Odenkirk assembled the City of Joliet legal team for an emergency meeting with the Office of the Governor and emerged with a 5-year lease agreement which allowed the city direct control over the state-owned property. In response to a challenge to repurpose items destroyed by arson in the Old Joliet Prison site, the Old Joliet Prison Burnt District Artists Collective was formed in 2018. The group borrows its name from a reference in the 1871 Great Chicago Fire and is comprised of a diverse, eclectic assortment of Joliet-based artists, artisans, creators who work across a variety of media. There's a prisoner reception and classification area, burned in August of 2016. The mattress factory and industries building burnt Memorial Day of 2017. The records warehouse burned in August 28th, 2017. Now there's the cistern here, this large bulging structure. In February of 1857, the Board of Penitentiary Commissioners were looking for a site for the new state penitentiary. One member of this commission was Nelson D. Elwood, former mayor of Joliet, who held significant political and economic influence. The search for the best location in the state led Elwood and his fellow commission members to a site commonly known as Stoneville, located about 2 miles north of Joliet. The land rested on a solid base of limestone, which could be readily quarried and used for construction, in addition to making escape tunneling nearly impossible. A natural spring on the site would provide plenty of fresh water, and the Chicago and Alton Railroad ran through the property, which was also located near the Illinois and Michigan Canal. The 72 acres was purchased by the state for $100 an acre. The reservoir or cistern was approximately 40 feet in diameter with a depth of approximately 8 feet. Water was supplied from the artisan well located just a few feet away on the property and contained upwards of 8,800 gallons of water. Underground pipes pumped the water from the cistern throughout the prison grounds to buildings such as the bakery, hospital, stone sawing, etc. However, it did not go to the cell houses. There was a secondary water source, a basin well with a connected cistern, which could pump 30 gallons of water per minute to the warden's offices and living areas. From 1870 to 1895, the female inmates were held on the 4th floor of the admin building and were only allowed out of the building once a year, the 4th of July. Once the men were confined to their cells, the women were marched out through the courtyard, allowed to circle the cistern, then return to their quarters. In 1895, the warden passed a new regulation that allowed the women to leave their dormitory on Sunday afternoons, in addition to their 4th of July holiday. Over there to the north are the vocational shops. Many of the buildings on the prison complex were constructed as manufacturing buildings for private sector entities who leased prison labor and sold items on the open market, from boots to cigars to furniture. In later years, buildings were converted to vocational schools to teach prisoners various skills and trades. So really this whole area of the prison grounds was either industrial or training in nature, not residential. Here's the central guard tower. This is the prison's powerhouse. It was a central power plant constructed in the 1890s with this distinctive brick smokestack rising over 150 feet. Towers and tunnels. Okay, more sign reading. The Old Joliet Prison faced repeated calls for its closure less than 50 years after it was opened, cited as dirty, dangerous, and outdated. The state inspection in 1905 found that tuberculosis ran rampant in the prison, and the official reports termed the sanitation of the site repulsive, pestilential, and concluded it was a relic of barbarism. One of Joliet's most famous prisoners, Nathan Leopold, echoed the horrific conditions when he recalled in gripping detail the first time he entered the East Cell House in 1824. Quote, "The inside of the building was dark and gloomy, and it took a while for my eyes to accommodate themselves. From the center of the concrete floor rose a rectangular block of cells extending almost the entire length of the building. At each other 2 sets of spiral iron stairs, one for each face of the cell block, the stairs worn smooth in places from the passing of many feet. The stone walls of the buildings were pierced at intervals by barred windows rising to a height of several stories but so narrow that they admitted little light. The building was pervaded by an odor hard to classify, but one that is indelibly associated in my mind with prison. It seemed to consist primarily of the odor of worn metal, but it contained components also of disinfectant, of sour wet mops, and of unwashed humanity. It was an odor unique in my experience and impossible to describe. Those who have had experience of it will recognize it instantly. To those who have not, I despair of conveying an impression of it. There's Nathan Leopold, picture from 1924. Despite the near certainty of its closure in 1943, as papers around the country reported its planned abandonment, under the administration of Warden Joseph E. Reagan, the prison, probably due to its contributions to the war effort, was given a complete remodel through the post-war period, which undoubtedly spared it from demolition. This marked the one and only time in the prison's history that the main cell dimensions were altered to an expanded 5 foot wide, 8 foot tall, and 10 foot deep. Additionally, this was the first time the cell houses were provided with running water. And there's a picture of the warden. One of the most important components of the remodel period was seen only by a few select prison personnel, a network of underground tunnels which linked strategic locations throughout and safely accommodated the implementation of modern utilities. The tunnels connected all guard towers to the prison armory located in the administration building. In the event of an incident, the guards could mobilize quickly around the prison. The tunnels terminated at the central guard tower seen here, constructed circa 1940, which is now only accessible by tunnel. Cut into solid rock, the underground tunnels measure 8 foot wide, 7 feet tall, and run approximately 350 feet. A 1945 newspaper account documented the entire project, including the cost of each component. Rehabilitation of east and west cell blocks, $669,500. Update of storm and sanitary sewer system and sewer treatment plant, $133,900. Recondition of kitchen, cold storage building and dining room, $70,000 and change. Construction of a new 400 cell house, $463 and change. Construction of 30,000 or 300,000 gallon capacity water tower, $51,000 and change. Recondition of administration building, $51,000 and change. Installation of two-way radio system and telephone improvements, $13,000 and change. Much of the old Joliet prison's current appearance retains the style of Warden Reagan's remodel. Yard department. There are 3 places for people to use toilet facilities on the premises. The only modern ones are in the entrance building, where you either pay your fee or show your online pass. And then there's a couple of portalets scattered around. I think there's another one that's way off in that direction somewhere. Prisoner picnic tables. Basketball court, parallel bars, all sorts of recreation stuff. I don't know what this was. It is not described in the map. But it seems like it's not intended to be anything other than some sort of exercise apparatus. Now, they say that the self-guided tours are only an hour and a half long, but since you're kind of unsupervised out here, I would think that once you've paid your fee and gone in, that probably nobody's going to say anything to you if you overstay the hour and a half. This is the honor dorm here, although the map identifies it as a vocational school. This building was erected in the late 1800s. Like most structures throughout the prison, it was used as a workshop for private companies who leased convict labor. Sanborn fire insurance maps show it was occupied by the Zeltz, Schwab Company, boot manufacturers, and the Franklin Chair Company. In later years, the upper level of the building was converted into an honor dorm, where inmates who exhibited exceptionally good behavior could reside in a dormitory setting in cubicles rather than in cells. This unassuming building also holds a special place in cinema history as the location of one of the most memorable scenes in an iconic film, The Blues Brothers. As Joliet Jake Blues, portrayed by John Belushi, leaves the prison, he collects his property from a disapproving guard played by Frank Oz before dramatically exiting the prison's eastern sally port to be reunited with his brother Elwood, portrayed by Dan Aykroyd. The return of Jake's clothing and possessions was Hollywood flair, as former guards attested that prisoners' clothing would have never been kept and then returned. In the late summer of 1979, a massive film crew descended on the Old Joliet Prison after the production was authorized by Warden Dennis Wolfe. Security was tight around the highly publicized film, and photos of the production remain rare. Sue Block, the administrative assistant to Warden Wolfe, recalled that Belushi, Aykroyd, and Oz and other actors on site like Henry Gibson exuded kindness to staff, guards, and prisoners, some of whom were even paid for their participation in the film. Block recalled that Aykroyd, who studied criminology before he became an actor, took a particular interest in the prison's operations. In the otherwise tense environment of the Old Joliet Prison, Block recalled the film was a much-needed break from routine. Quote, "It can sometimes be difficult to maintain a positive attitude day to day in a maximum security prison, both for staff and inmates. I recall that during the couple of weeks of filming, there was an air of excitement and a feeling that the Joliet Prison was special for being selected as a filming site. The filming provided a less serious look at prison life and allowed some escapism on everyone's part." There's a photo of Administrative Assistant to the Warden Sue Block, far right, with John Belushi outside the honor dorm during the filming of the Blues Brothers in August 1979. The other woman in the blue shirt is not identified here. Since its release in 1980, the Blues Brothers has delighted audiences of millions around the world, defying conventional genres as part musical, part comedy, part action film. In conjunction with the state bicentennial celebration of 2018, it was voted as the greatest movie to be filmed in Illinois. There's a photo of Dan Aykroyd at the prison, photographed by former Joliet police officer Ed Rochelle, who worked security for the film. Yeah, it looks like there's no point in going down that way. It looks like it's all fenced off a little ways down. This building in the middle of the image is the fire department building for the prison. As a result of the large number of manufacturing activities in the early 1900s, the prison constructed and operated its own fire department. The building was later converted to storage for tools and chemicals, as well as a recreation space with a pool table and musical equipment. Looks like an old gas pump. Here's the other side of the power plant. This building here is the library. Originally constructed as a manufacturing building, the second level of this building housed the prison library at the time of its closure. The library, an important component of the prison since its inception, was funded by admissions from public tours. And here are more vocational shops in this building. Shops and vocational schools. The Joliet Penitentiary housed many different shops throughout the years. In the early years, the products of these shops included shoes, cigars, marble, dressed limestone, rattan furniture, and wooden furniture. When the prison opened, prisoners were legally and publicly leased to the lowest bidder for labor. The warden, essentially a general contractor, billed the state for various construction projects. Following several scandals and public outcry regarding the excessive costs associated with the prison, the practice was modified and the prison was proudly advertised as self-sufficient with a surplus income in 1874. This surplus of income was due in large part to a new system that had been developed, allowing private contractors to use the labor from inmates for a set fee each day. This system was criticized as not being only profitable to the state, but for the wardens and commissioners charged with its oversight. It was observed that many men laid the foundations for large fortunes in the shoe, shirt, and furniture factories and the foundries of the Old Joliet Prison. Labor unions, especially those in Joliet most impacted by convict labor, led the charge against it. One example was proposed legislation was introduced in 1873 to prohibit prisoners from quarrying stone after it was revealed that 2,000 stone workers and quarrymen in Joliet were unable to find work in the competition of virtually free prison labor. After years of financial scandals, political infighting, and pressure from labor unions, on July 1, 1904, contract labor was abolished by the Anti-Convict Labor Law. This is when the prison industry system was developed, in which prisoners were mandated to create goods only for internal state use, such as making license plates. According to the 1906 report of the State Board of Prison Industries in Illinois, the law provided that what was manufactured by convicts was to be such articles as are needed and used therein, and also such as are required by the state or any political division thereof, and in the buildings, offices, and public institutions owned, managed, and controlled by the state. Laws became even more stringent to provide that prison-produced material could only be used specifically for corrections facilities. Under Warden Joseph Reagan, the prison shops at both the Joliet Penitentiary and Stateville Prison were fully mobilized to help in the World War II efforts. According to Illinois State Archives, communications from the Department of Public Safety concerning war contributions of prisons, January 24, 1945, quote, "The Illinois prisons made significant contributions to the war effort. Of a total of 7,594 prison inmates system-wide on June 30, 1945, 1,230 of them were employed in war work. For rush top priority orders, prisoners gave up holidays and otherwise worked additional hours. Institutions at Joliet and Stateville held 3 contracts with the Army, 1 with the Navy, and 2 with the Lend-Lease Division of the Treasury Department. The garments manufactured or repaired at these institutions were shipped to Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. Inmates also assembled pallets for transporting 155mm and 245mm artillery shells. With workers in exceedingly high demand in all sectors of the economy, unions were not outspoken in their opposition to this practice, which in harder times would have been criticized as unfair competition. There's a photo of surplus military clothing stacked 3 stories high as it awaits restoration and repairs by prisoners at this prison. Just under 430,000 garments were processed. Over the years, these manufacturing jobs were converted into vocational centers to teach the inmates various skills and trades to increase their ability to find jobs after the sentences expired. At the time of the prison's closure, the western building was utilized as a welding school, while in the building to the east taught a variety of carpentry and machinery techniques. Throughout the mid-20th century, a more charming facet of convict labor emerged when prisoners employed at the vocational shops constructed and repaired toys during the Christmas season for families in need throughout the state. A 1940 press photo described Santa in prison gray. He wears no scarlet robe, no flowing whiskers, but this man is doing his bit as an unknown Santa Claus in the grim gray institution that is Joliet Penitentiary. He is one of the inmates who voluntarily repairs cast-off toys for distribution to the needy children of Illinois this coming Yule. Dolls, wagons, tricycles, etc. are made as good as new. The toys are collected in a drive organized by Joliet's civic leaders. Well, that's why this area was fenced off, because it's the west gate. And that really goes onto an open area like a parking lot, on the other side of which is a train station, and then immediately a double set of railroad tracks. And just beyond that is the Des Plaines River, I believe. Some sort of a river. I think it's the Des Plaines. There's more information on the library here. One of the few places that prisoners of the Old Joliet Prison found comfort and refuge was in the pages of the books found in the prison library. The library occupied the second story of this building. That's this building. At the time of the prison's closure, it was a legal requirement for the prison to maintain a library for the benefit of its prisoners. An early account of the prison from 1863 noted it contained 500 volumes, which were personally selected by the penitentiary commissioners at the request of the prison's first warden, Samuel Casey. The article underscored the importance of the institution, stating, "A yearly addition to this library would be looked upon by the convicts as next to freedom, as the highest boon the state could confer upon them." Throughout much of the 19th century, the library and educational needs of the prisoners were supervised by the prison chaplain, who also cared for the spiritual needs of the inmates. This included screening all reading material available to the prisoners. With the number of inmates quickly swelling the new prison to capacity, by 1866, Chaplain Lathrop reported to the General Assembly that the prison had nothing worthy of the name library, and requested an appropriation of $2,000 to establish a suitable collection, which would include educational textbooks. By the 1880s, the library received a dedicated location in the original chapel, which was located in a structure demolished in the 1940s that extended the North Seg building to the administration building. It was reported to be a large, well-lighted room with open bookshelves extending along the walls and included a small room for binding and book repairs. During this period, 25 cents admission fee from prison visitors funded the library and chapel service. A penitentiary report stated that between October 1902 and September 1903, admission fees raised $4,211.50, accounting for an incredible 16,846 visitors. By 1909, the library boasted enough files or enough titles to adopt the Dewey Decimal System. This building coming up next is the chapel. Not a very chapel-looking place necessarily. Oh, we have to look at this building through these openings. This again is the one that the upper level of was the library. This appears to be a laundry facility. Some nice industrial-looking laundry equipment. The building seen here housed the laundry facilities. This two-story structure was built in the late 1800s and is, as characteristic, the entire complex constructed by the Joliet limestone quarried by prisoners. According to a 1998 Sanborn Fire Insurance map, the structure was occupied by the Frankfort Chair Company, one of the private companies which leased convict labor. The building was where finished chairs were varnished and included office spaces. At the time of the prison's 2002 enclosure, the first floor of the building contained the prison laundry, and the second floor of the building held the prison library. The history of apparel at the Joliet prison evolved with attitudes about the treatment of prisoners. Upon entry into the prison system, an inmate was issued a set of clothing. In early years, this included the dreaded black and white stripes commonly associated with prison uniforms. An 1860 observer once described prisoners as human zebras. An inmate named Franklin Hollingrud vividly recounted receiving his striped prison uniform shortly after he arrived at the Joliet in the 1890s. Here I received a convict's complete outfit: a cap, trousers, coat, and vest, of course wool striped black and white, heavy brogan shoes, a hickory shirt, Canton flannel underwear, a towel, a handkerchief, a comb, 2 pairs of woolen socks, and a pair of mittens. Take care of these socks, I was admonished. You get but 2 pairs a year. Your underclothes you will change in the cell house once every 2 weeks. For almost 4 decades, the inmate's uniform consisted of the stripes until they were finally abolished as the standard prison garb on July 4th, 1896 by Warden Robert L. Allen. Although the stripes were still used to identify new arrivals and inmates needing extra supervision, this practice ended by 1930. In 1937, a state of Illinois representative reported on the efficiency of the laundry system. The clothing of the inmates is laundered with institutional equipment. Observation of the inmates while walking in line indicated the clothing is neat and clean and in fairly good repair. Account is kept of the clothing turned in and out of the laundry. A complete change of clothing is furnished to each man once a week. The day for the change will vary according to the cell house gallery and work assignment. Here's an unknown inmate demonstrating the stripes in a mugshot, as well as other hallmarks of prisoner's appearance circa 1900. A completely shaven face and close-cropped haircut. Former guards recall that in later years of operation, like many areas in the prison, there was no air conditioning in the laundry building and temperatures regularly reached over 100 degrees. Clothing was placed into numbered mesh bags and was washed and dried without ever leaving the bag. Wash days alternated for blues, whites, and bedding. Inmates working in the laundry were often assigned there because they were high risk amongst the general population and needed extra protection. Despite the sweltering conditions, the laundry was a sought-after assignment because those assigned were allowed the privilege of additional showers. Following the 2002 closure, the laundromat joined the ranks of the Old Joliet Prison's film critics, featured in a pivotal sequence in the 2005 thriller Derailed, starring Clive Owen and Jennifer Aniston. Okay, now we're approaching the chapel. There are some small concessions to its function as a chapel. Some vaguely chapel-like windows. And a front entrance that looks, again, vaguely chapel-like, or maybe like a theater. Make ye a new heart and a new spirit, Ezekiel 18:31. Looks more like a chapel on the inside, doesn't it? The chapel was one of very few places of comfort and refuge inside the walls of Old Joliet Prison. The inherent nature of the loss of freedoms in prison, coupled with constitutionally protected activities like worship, made for a complex and at times complicated relationship between the chaplain and the rest of the penitentiary. In the early years of the prison, the emphasis on the chaplain's duties were not focused on religious instruction as much as they were meant to be a humane relief to the otherwise harsh and rigid discipline that the administration of the prison required. Around the turn of the century, prisoners recalled the rules of the prison were not read by the warden but by the chaplain. The chaplain also administered the library and school. This lack of dedicated spiritual and religious counseling was noted by an observer within 5 years of the prison's opening. An American clergyman and author, Reverend Thomas Mears Eddy, inspected the prison in 1862 and concluded, quote, "We fear there is no adequate provision for the spiritual instruction of the prisoners. There are $2,000 appropriated for a chaplain, a meager and disgraceful appropriation. It is possible to reform a portion of those who enter the prison. At all events, every means should be tried. The reformatory labor should be as constant as the industrial. We believe that the well-paid services of a competent man can be better afforded by the state than his absence. It is important that reformation based on religious principles should be attempted. The minister of Christ should be there, not perfunctorily ones on some Sunday or at some hour stolen from other services, but regularly as a spiritual advisor and confidant. We have nothing against the present chaplain of the Joliet prison, but of course attention to the penitentiary is his left-hand work while the right is given to parochial duties." It's hard to get a image here without reflections. That's the chaplain's office circa 1900. There's a chapel orchestra. By 1886, a dedicated chapel structure also containing the library and visiting room connected to the southern entrance of the north seg. The building resembled an auditorium more than a chapel. It was a simple room, sparsely decorated with several plaques and biblical verses. The chapel was used as a multi-purpose facility that was oftentimes the center of social life at the prison. This included the showing of the first movie of the prison in 1912. A live radio broadcast, The Big House Review, was also made from the chapel to the outside world in 1935. The chapel was set ablaze and nearly destroyed in 1932 by a depressed inmate serving a life sentence who had trustee privileges. The striking 1965 chapel building seen here is a surprising mid-century modern design by the Chicago architectural firm of Lobel, Schlossman, Bennett, and Dart. With its distinctive copper roof, the building still respects the character of the surrounding Joliet limestone structures. In later years, regular Protestant and Catholic services were held here each Sunday, and the chaplain also facilitated the practices of other religions and ministers such as Judaism and Islam, though a former guard recalled voodoo was prohibited. The chapel also served as an area where special privileges and comforts were granted. It was one of the few air-conditioned buildings in the complex, and continued its role as the social center of the prison, offering community presentations, movies, shows, and even concerts and stand-up comedy performances. The legendary Chicago soul group, the Joliets, performed here in the 1980s. From the earliest days of chapel services until the prison's closure, a band comprised entirely of prisoners was responsible for musical performances and was constantly singled out for their talent. Inmates listened to business, religious, and community leaders at the chapel inside the Joliet Correctional Center on March 16, 1971. So this building next door to the chapel is the school. With the admonishment over the door, "Make time serve you." But don't come in. Okay, the school. Like the chapel, the school offered prisoners a glimmer of respite and opportunity in otherwise dismal surroundings. Though not always in a straight line, decades of progressive thought at the Old Joliet Prison saw the notion of education move from a passing thought to a priority. It is not a coincidence that both the school and chapel, two pillars of efforts to reform prisoners, occupy the same structure. The school building officially opened in 1968, as documented in the inmate production newsletter Time. Author Richard Carlson not only extolled the state-of-the-art facility, but encouraged his fellow prisoners to take advantage of the opportunities the school provided, noting 94% of the enrolled inmates had not yet completed 7th grade. Quote, "It would be safe to say that education plays a very vital role in rehabilitation if a man is sincere in his desire to straighten out his life and make a place for himself in outside society. He should really avail himself of this opportunity. Without advancing himself educationally, how can a man hope to advance himself on the outside? To be able to move upwards in the competitive society that exists outside of these walls, to be able to earn a good living, and to move out of the ruts we have worn on the path to the joint, this is a hip way of looking at things." The phrase that appears on the building entrance, "Make time serve you," is attributed to Willie Sutton, who, following a release from prison in 1969 for a series of Prohibition-area robberies in the East Coast, became an authority and security consultant, or became an author and security consultant. In what is now a risk management lesson named for him, Sutton famously, although falsely, responded to a reporter who asked him why he robbed banks. Quote, "Because that's where the money is." There's Warden Joseph E. Reagan, an early champion of the notion that education of inmates would reduce their likelihood of returning to prison. In this photo, he proudly presents a high school diploma to an inmate graduate circa 1950. There's some vocational education going on there. Okay, I'm going to circle back to the middle and see a couple things I missed there, and then try to go into these buildings where we can do a little bit of inside snooping. This open space was known as the yard, and the map that is given to each visitor states that originally, or at some earlier point in this prison's history, the yard here was occupied by various vocational buildings and factory buildings, but was gradually replaced by this open area. You know, it kind of looks like the roof of the admin building is down too. There's an awful lot of light in the rooms for what could come through the windows, so I suspect there's either an incomplete roof or no roof up there. And I missed it when I first walked by, but it appears that the machine shop is not locked up. Well, not entirely. We can go through the front door, but that's about it. That's on the side of the power plant. Even with the razor wire they've got here, it seems like they still have vandals. This building is called on the map the original cell. Under a complete remodel following the Second World War, both cell houses were modernized to include running water and larger accommodations. A single cell, one of 900 originally built, was reconstructed here as a museum space, or a museum piece. I guess they meant that next building, because the one that the map shows this, the cell being in, is the one I'm in, and that ain't correct. There's nothing here. I'm surprised the door's even open. Oh, okay. No, they put the circle on the map in a funny place. This building that I just was in is called the Captain's Court. So the 1858 North Seg building, the first building constructed at the Old Joliet Prison, contained an enclosed wall with an ornate tower structure at the northwest corner in this location, which held the office of the prisoner's deputy warden. According to an 1891 Sanborn map, this intersection was known as Broadway and Main Streets. And I guess that refers to the streets out here. Traditionally, this area was where inmate punishment was dispensed, called the Captain's Court. The court, the system of discipline for the inmates, was described in a 1965 profile in the Chicago Tribune as the instrument through which the warden runs the prison. Punishment at the Old Joliet Prison was harsh in the early days. Lashings, stockades, and ducking inmates in cold water baths were all approved methods for violating prison rules when the Old Joliet Prison opened, though most of these methods were legally abolished shortly thereafter. Guards, originally called keepers, carried heavy wooden canes to enforce discipline. As penal philosophy progressed over the years, the captain's court became more formalized and even democratic. The Tribune went on to outline the 1965 process, that is, where the accusers were the guards of the prisoners and the accusations were based on infractions of rules in the form of a ticket. Disregarding verbal commands from guards began the infraction process of the court. By 1965, guards were not permitted to carry clubs or guns and were prohibited from beating prisoners for an infraction of rules, and as such their verbal commands and ensuing consequences if they were not followed were the agent of control. By 1965, select inmates who were issued a ticket could be given the opportunity to have a say in their punishment. The Tribune noted an example of an inmate who chose 3 days in solitary confinement over a 10-day ban on listening to the radio because he did not want to miss the World Series. The newspaper concluded the success of the administration of the prison rests largely on how well the captain's court operates. Warden Frank Pate, successor to Joseph Reagan, who worked his way up to warden from a guard, underscored the importance of the selection of guard captains to the captain's court and the trust placed in them by the prison administration, noting they maintained detailed files on each of the several thousand inmates and were expected to document every ticket or issued, who the inmate had fought with, who had made threats against him, and the names of persons eligible to write or visit. Pate said, "It is their job to learn and remember as much as they can about every man in this institution and be able to act as one. In doing this, they must keep in mind that order must be maintained and that punishment must be imposed and privileges awarded without any special treatment for any man." Pate went on to tell the Tribune that the captain's court had discretion to assign prisoners to isolation or segregation cells as punishment. Convicts in isolation cells, commonly known as solitary confinement, were held in an unlit cell alone, received 1 meal a day with no exercise and no privileges, including reading. Convicts in segregation cells fared slightly better, remaining alone in their cells but served 3 meals a day, allowed a brief exercise period and the privilege of reading, including the newspaper of their choice, if they paid for the subscription. Pate noted that a convict could only be placed in isolation for a limited time, but be held in segregation for an unlimited period of time. He recalled that as a guard, the longest period he had seen an inmate held in segregation was 11.5 years, but that the individual eventually changed his negative approach and later wrote to Pate telling him that he had proudly served his 20th year of good time as a free man. Okay. Now we'll circle back to that here. So this is something we can't get into at this point. It may be one of those things you can only go into if you're part of a tour. I don't know if that little thing there is supposed to be the reconstructed cell, old-fashioned cell. Might be. But I can't, yeah, okay. The sign says original cell 1858. I'll try to utilize my camera's zoom here to yeah. Back to the Powerhouse again. Prior to 1893, there was not a power or steam plant of practical use on the grounds to operate the various shops and factories. The power used to operate the prison was either owned by the state or the various contractors whose businesses were inside the walls. The state only provided 2 electric engines for the prison, leaving the rest of the power to be supplied by the business owners. It was determined that a central electric power plant was necessary. Using convict labor, the central power plant and boiler house was built as the most advanced and economical mode of distributing power, heat, and light to the grounds. The 6 boilers operated with a total capacity of 1,800 horsepower, carrying 90 pounds of steam, and were operational by the spring of 1894. Warden Robert Allen stated in 1896, "The entire plant is in a shape to answer all demands that can reasonably be made upon it during this generation." Unfortunately, unforeseen repairs on the building and machinery were commonplace. A new generator was purchased in 1898 for $1,200. In 1996, the state allocated $407,000 for upgrades to the powerhouse, including a new generator. Now they show a collapsed roof here. I'm not sure if any part of this roof is collapsed at this point or not. So that over there is the West Cell House. The West Cell House contained the Protective Custody Wing. In 1979, Cell 415 housed Joliet Jake in the Blues Brothers movie. Okay, this is called the North Segregation Building. North Segregation and Death Row, 1858. The building, now known as North Segregation or simply North Seg, has the distinction of the original building constructed at the Old Joliet Prison. On May 22, 1858, 53 inmates, 53 men and 3 women, left the first state penitentiary in Alton for this structure. Conditions at Alton had deteriorated to the point that transfer to Joliet to work on the construction of the Joliet Prison was a preferred assignment. By early 1860, the Chicago Tribune reported that 660 prisoners had been transferred to the prison, and the chief employment of these is upon the erection of the penitentiary itself. The most trusty of the convicts from time to time transferred to the work, which was desired by them as less irksome than their shop employments. Segregation and isolation of prisoners from the general population as a form of punishment or for protective purposes was common on prison grounds. Originally known as the separate system, a total of 25 solitary confinement cells originally occupied the structure. An early description of the building, which matches much of the site's contemporary appearance, stated, "Cells are 7 by 17 feet in size and 12 feet in height, with double doors of wood and iron. The windows are near the top of the cells, thus being out of reach of the inmates. The most dangerous men and the insane are confined here." The article notes that the building was originally planned to accommodate 100 cells. The iconic phrase carved into the floor, "It's never too late to mend," was meant to be an affirmation offering personal reflection for inmates. It is thought to be a reference to a novel by English author and dramatist Charles Reade, who was credited as helping to end the status of Australia and New Zealand as prison colonies for its portrayal of period prison conditions. The image of the carving was duplicated in the closing sequence of the 1980 film The Blues Brothers. Inmates sent to North Segregation would spend a total of 23 hours a day in the well-ventilated cells, that's in quotes, and received a restricted diet of 2 ounces of bread and a cup of water every 24 hours. Methods of punishment within solitary included inmates being forced to stand handcuffed to their interior cell door for 12 hours. In 1927, Illinois passed the Thompson Bill, which officially replaced the state's method of execution from the gallows to the electric chair. Prior to 1928, hangings were carried out by the Will County Sheriff and performed at former county jail structure at Chicago and Washington Streets. The bill further stipulated that prisoners sentenced to death outside of Cook County would have their sentence carried out at either the Joliet or Chester penitentiaries, depending on where the county sent its inmates. As a result, the second story of North Segregation became home to death row for approximately 20 years. The electric chair, constructed by S.M. Briggs Company of Rising Sun, Indiana, was installed in the second story of a now demolished structure immediately adjacent to North Seg, described by the Chicago Tribune as a combined visitors' room, chapel, and death house. Okay, let's look inside. They cautioned not to close any of these doors behind us, as they would possibly stick and require a long time to get out. Yuck. Looks like somebody's tried to use this. So a bed and lots of space. You can see that the plumbing fixtures are given quite a lot of access here. The walls are quite thick, and the only plumbing is accessed right through here for I think the hot and cold water and the flushing apparatus for the toilets. I think these are all pretty much the same. Well, this one's got a different bed in it, and the toilet's positioned differently. This one has a sink in it, and there may be a toilet around the corner. I couldn't see it, but there doesn't seem to be provision for a toilet in there. There's no plumbing fixture, although there's that grating, that louver, which may cover up a hole like this. Oh, now we can see a better view of the chapel across the way. This was not apparent from ground level. Okay, this building in front of us is the dining hall. The prison dining hall was among the most recent buildings within the complex, built in 1987. It replaced the structure built in 1904. Prior to this, prisoners ate the meals within their cells. Quite a lot of graffiti in here. Custodial closet of some sort. And I'm guessing that's where they lined up to get their grub. And then sort of a mirror image of it here. This is got a few items in it relative to the movie. Not a lot, but they said up front that this picture that was going to be here had some of the actual inmates that were allowed to participate in the filming of the movie, the Blues Brothers. There's John Belushi at center, and some of the other guys who appeared. Yeah, you can actually rent tripods, so you can, take pictures with your camera on a tripod. You have to obviously return it when you leave. I don't know how they enforce that. Looks like somebody set off a fire here. I'm still kind of amazed that they have any vandalism in these places with, prison-like structure and barbed wire on the walls, that anybody can get in here to cause any trouble. Doesn't look like we can get into the gymnasium here. Yeah. I don't see a collapsed roof on the Powerhouse, so I'm not sure what that uncaptioned photo is all about. Although it doesn't look like the same kind of roof that was on the other buildings, but I don't want to attach any significance to that without more information. On the other side of the map they hand out is a illustration of more what the place looked like in times past, where that whole area that was the yard is, you know, got a lot of buildings in it now. And there would have been a hospital building here, which would have been kind of like right here, but isn't there now. Doesn't look like. Yeah, there's a little bit about the gymnasium building here, but we can't get a look inside. Physical recreation and exercise was an important component of the daily lives of inmates at the Old Joliet Prison. Prior to the administration of Warden Edmund Allen, virtually no outdoor leisure time was provided to the inmates, with the exception of annual 4th of July celebrations. In his 1914 report to the Prisoners' Board of Commissioners, Allen extolled the accomplishments he attributed to establishment of recreational activities. Quote, "One of my first innovations was granting of 1 hour a day for recreation. When I published my recreation program, a number of older employees of the prison who had down from the period when recreation in any form was unheard of, told me frankly and with sincerity that I was undertaking something which was potentially perilous. I told every man that if he believed I was wrong and did not care to take the chance of testing the plan with me, that he could resign and step aside. I received no resignations, notwithstanding that the space in which the 200 men have to play is less than 2 acres in extent and is cluttered with overhead pipes, buildings, and materials, that the baselines of the various diamonds overrun each other, that the fielders both in and out in various games play in identical territory, that collisions and mix-up are of an hourly occurrence. Not a single prisoner has been taken from the recreational field for violation of the rules of the prison. I am more proud of this record than any other thing that has come into my life. It has vindicated my hopes. It proved that the man inside, when given a chance, knows how to take advantage of it. It has done more than this. It has practically wiped out the punishment records of the prison. Where previous confinements in solitary would average upwards of 75 a month, they now run about 30 a month and appear to be decreasing all the time. The men are happier, and some of them have told me that they would rather be deprived of their lives than of the outdoor recreation period. The pallor that once marked them as men from the inside has given way to tan and ruddy health. They look more like men and act more like men. I cannot help believing, and I think you gentlemen will concur in the thought, that men coming from an environment that is lightened by healthy and enjoyable physical exercise are more apt to be self-respecting, more self-reliant than men who are crushed by ruthless discipline. In continuity with the importance of providing recreational opportunities to the inmates, the gymnasium served as a multi-purpose building for prisoners and included collegiate-sized basketball court, a weight room, offices, and showers. Inmates and prison officials alike were protective of the court. Street shoes were initially not allowed on the gym floor, and a performance by the legendary soul singer James Brown was moved to the adjacent new dining hall to preserve the gymnasium floor. After the prison closed, the gymnasium continued to play an important role at the Old Joliet Prison in the Fox television series Prison Break. The cell houses were deemed unsuitable for filming, so film crews constructed an entire cell block inside the gymnasium in which the galleries faced one another. The cell aesthetics were modeled closely after real prison cells. So, I think we're on a location where the hospital building used to stand, but I don't believe this is the hospital building. Well, maybe it is. It kind of matches this old illustration, although it's not shown on the current map. Oh, I'm sorry, it is too. Yeah, this building is the hospital. The one I was just peeking inside. The prison's first hospital was constructed within the kitchen department, described in 1863 as a large room kept scrupulously neat and clean, with a cabinet of medicines and a library of closely selected books at one end, the remaining 3 sides being occupied by cots with ample store of clean linen. By 1890, this single room proved to lack essential requirements for the proper care and custody of the sick. The proximity of the original hospital to the prison's food storage areas had unintended consequences. Healthy inmates were given food that was in contact with individuals suffering from tuberculosis, typhoid fever, influenza, and various other diseases. Thus, the hospital itself was a breeding ground for disease to run rampant throughout the prison. There's a picture of the hospital sick ward circa 1895. Newly arrived inmates could find themselves in the hospital shortly after their arrival, especially if they were convicted in a highly publicized or particularly heinous case, with a simple instruction that they be put through. A new hospital built in 1895 improved the mental and physical condition of the prisoners. It was updated and supplied with the latest and most modern appliances for medical and surgical treatment of disease. Wards were enlarged, which increased bed space and allowed for more fresh air, sunlight, and ventilation. The acting physician stated that the much dreaded and terrible disease will entirely disappear from this institution with the addition of the grounds, or with the new addition to the grounds. Unfortunately, by 1917, the facility was already antiquated and lacking. A publication titled "Insanity in American Prisons" stated that the hospital would be better served as a cow stable. Among the inmates who suffered in this building was Richard Loeb. He was reported to be in a state of delirium, recovering from measles at the Old Joliet Prison Hospital shortly after his arrival. Upon hearing his client was strapped to his hospital cot as a result of being physically combative, Loeb's famous attorney, Clarence Darrow, remarked grimly, "I hope he dies. He would be better off. Our experts, after examining him, gave him 5 years to live under prison routine. He may go quicker." At the time of the prison's 2002 closure, the first floor contained a pharmacy, x-ray room, various treatment rooms, and operating rooms for the visiting dentist and optometrist. The second floor was primarily used for isolation, as well as a guard station and staff meeting rooms. The third floor was used for mental health and included an office for the psychologist, as well as offices for various mental health counselors. It's getting noisier here because this road that's just on the other side of the wall here, we're getting into rush hour, so the traffic is picking up. And there down, we can see the far wall, and then about halfway down, that's the east gate. The riots of 1931. Just before dawn on February 22nd, 1931, 5 convicts crept across the silent yard of Old Joliet Prison to this location, which at the time was the site of the prison barbershop. Confident in their plans for escape after subduing a guard, they had no way of knowing they were walking into a trap. Moments later, 3 of the 5 inmates lay dead, their bodies riddled with gunshot wounds. The remaining 2 inmates surrendered. Unbeknownst to the 5 would-be escapees, prison authorities had been alerted to the plans, and a small army of guards lay hidden outside of the prison walls, armed to the teeth with rifles and sawed-off shotguns, promptly and violently ending the escape. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, all remained calm at the prison, but the killing of the inmates would prove to be a spark that ignited a powder keg of hostility towards the parole board, which had been simmering for years. In an ill-timed incident, an inmate died while in solitary confinement as punishment for insubordination just days after the failed attempt, or escape attempt. Not long after, a series of 5 full-scale riots erupted at both the Old Joliet Prison and the Stateville Penitentiary over the course of a week. When it was over, Stateville saw 7 buildings destroyed or damaged, and the Old Joliet Prison saw 4. 3 convicts were shot during the uprising and 1 killed. The riots were put down with the assistance of over 100 state police officers and 4 companies of National Guard infantry. The Joliet prison riots of 1931 received international media attention, much of it sympathetic to the plight of the convicts. An editorial in the Rock Island Argus, acknowledging past problems with the Joliet Parole Board, stated, "If it can be proved that the board has not been fair and just, the Joliet prison riots are easily explained. Once convicts get the impression that favoritism is shown in the matter of paroles or reducing prison terms, outbreaks are sure to happen. Former parole boards, exercising great power over convicts in this state, have occasioned grievous scandals. The operation of the parole system at Joliet Prison is a fit subject for careful investigation in view of the repeated riots and the many complaints that have been voiced against the board." Others, like Senator Roy Woods, felt the riots were a result of coddled prisoners who were acting out, stating brusquely, "What we need is more guns and less talk." A state inquest to the underlying causes of the riot was quickly launched with the eyes of the world on the Old Joliet Prison. The inquest began ominously, with nearly every inmate hammering on the bars of their cells as members entered the prison. In the end, 2 deputy wardens were dismissed following the inquest, though not cited directly as a result of the riots. As America began its arduous journey through the Great Depression, little meaningful reform materialized. Damage and demonstration is the thought of the convicts right now. Propaganda is being spread amongst the prisoners by the more unruly ones. They are saying to the others, "Nothing was ever won in any American prison by one riot. We must have another to show the authorities we mean business. They tore up state property and laughed, now let them howl." Warden Henry Hill, Chicago Tribune, July 25th, 1931. And that photo just shows officials inspecting the damage to the old Joliet Prison's dining hall. There appears to be a way to get in and see something here. They said you can go anywhere that's not roped off or barred shut. Oh yeah. This is the basement level of this cell block. This would be the east cell block, of course. And it's too dark in there to see anything, but I suspect that's the corridor that provides access to plumbing and electrical service for the cells. And now on this side we can walk along and see in. Little desk with a stool and the combination sink and toilet, electrical outlet. Like I said before, on the far side of this wall is that alley or aisleway that was too dark to look into. The ventilation, wiring for the lighting and the outlet, the plumbing, both fresh water and sewage would all be piped through that area. Looks like everyone is identical. Yeah, you can kind of look down here, but not very far, and see all the plumbing apparatus. Now this is the other side of the view we had from way down there. Some sort of a tour going on down there. According to the website, they didn't have any tours today. Maybe it isn't a formal tour. Yep, no roof up there, although it looks like the front part of it's still intact. Looks like it's the rear portion that's missing. So that's the admin building, obviously, or administration building. And here's the West Cell House again. We viewed it from a distance. Completed in 1865, the turreted West Cell House was larger than its eastern counterpart. That would be the part we just walked through. Because of the naturally lower terrain, the West Cell House included a fifth-tier gallery of 100 cells, whereas the East Cell House contained 400 cells. The West Cell House was the chief beneficiary of a $5 million modernization beginning in 1947 under Warden Joseph E. Reagan. World War II production needs spared the prison from a planned demolition, and though it was ordered to be evacuated, Reagan kept 350 prisoners on site to keep the prison's textile plant operational, undoubtedly saving the structure from demolition. A 1951 Chicago Tribune article on the modernization stated, "Squalor is also vanishing in the two main cell houses, each of which originally held 450 two-man cubicles, 4 by 7 feet, furnished only with narrow iron bunks, a water jug, and a slop bucket. Light came only through barred doors, and ventilation was limited to air that could seep through a few window slits. On hot days, the prison's stench often escaped the walls to disgust passers-by. In the new setup, where there are 320 cells per wing, larger and individually lighted, each contains spring beds, toilet, lavatory with hot and cold running water. Larger cell block windows admit sunlight, and roof ventilators change the air every 5 minutes. The general renovations involved the tuck pointing of walls from which the accumulated filth of decades was sandblasted. The old combined visitors room, chapel, and death house was demolished. A new chapel is to be erected." There's before modernization, and there's after modernization. Though it held many notorious prisoners, perhaps the most famous resident of the West Cell House was fictional. Joliet Jake Blues, portrayed by John Belushi, was retrieved from cell 415 in the famous opening sequence of the 1980 film The Blues Brothers. The West Cell House also saw its share of harrowing experiences, one of which is still very well remembered by many in Joliet, when 200 inmates affiliated with the Black Pea Stone Nation gang barricaded themselves inside the West Cell House on April 23, 1975, taking 8 staff members hostage. The prisoners protested the removal of their leaders to the Menard Penitentiary, which is downstate Illinois, where guards had been fired on charges of racism. Prison officials acknowledged an increase in gang tensions at Joliet and Stateville leading up to the incident. The Illinois State Police were deployed, and after approximately 6 hours, 70 inmates who had held out surrendered after Warden Frank Finkbeiner took the public radio airwaves to assure them the transfers would not take place. Herbert Catlett, a 29-year-old former gang member, was stabbed to death when he attempted to mediate, and the 8 hostages suffered minor injuries. One of the guard hostages, Lieutenant Harlan Robinson, recalled the terrifying experience as inmates stood over the hostages with hammers, and recalled one prisoner commanding as the state police breached the cell house, "If they come through the door, kill them any way you can." So this one doesn't look like we're going to get to walk up and down it. Just a lot of thick peeling paint. Almost makes it look like it's alive. Well, I was only planning on being here till 2:30, and it's already about 3:30, so I've overstayed my official visiting time by an hour. But I think I'm nearing the end of it. See if there's anything else down here. Yeah, there is an open gate there. Yeah, this is the other end, but it's just looking back the other way. Not a different view, really. And there appears to be nothing to see there. So that appears to be everything that one can see here, at least, I guess if you're on one of the official tours, guided tours, you can see a couple of more things. But still, you can see an awful lot just on the self-guided tour. Just about to be set free. Hey, where's my ride? I think before I leave, I'm going to go back into the visitor center, for lack of a more official word, and see if there's any gewgaws to pick up commemorating a visit here. Yeah, it looks like that little tour group was bussed in on one of those small buses. So not a busy day otherwise. I don't think I saw another person inside the grounds while I was here until that tour group showed up. All right. So I got here for a 1 o'clock tour, and it's now 3:45. So I spent 2 3/4 hours here, just walking around leisurely, looking at everything. So if you're planning on visiting this place, you have some idea of probably the maximum amount of time you would need to do it.
Continue on Collins Street.